Yes, I'm Attorney Ben Crump, and along with Attorney Mike Koskoff, I have the honor of representing the lineal descendants of the African slave Renty. His great-great-great-granddaughter, Tammy Lanier, has filed a lawsuit against Harvard University, one of the leading educational institutions in the world, definitely the leading educational institution in America. And what we are doing with that lawsuit is groundbreaking on every level. I believe that it will be the most consequential lawsuit in America in the field of civil rights since Brown versus the Board of Education, because once we are successful in having Harvard relinquish the slave photographs of Renty and his daughter Delia, it will mark the first time in history that an American institution has been forced to relinquish the inheritance of any of the descendants of African slaves in America. And more importantly, it will pave the way for future litigation in the way of making sure that black people in America finally can get their inheritance, because we never got 40 acres and a mule. We were never able to own anything. So when Abraham Lincoln and the United States government freed the slaves in 1865, the one thing we thought at least we owned was our person, and incumbent in that was our image. But Harvard University is saying 169 years later, no, Tammy Lanier, you still don't even own your image. We own your image. So in that lawsuit, we were very specific. The Hollywood director Steve McQueen and Brad Pitt produced the Oscar-winning movie 12 Years a Slave about Solomon Northup. Well, in this lawsuit, we are introducing and telling the story of Renty, who by our calculation is 169 years a slave. And we asked two fundamental questions in the lawsuit. Number one, how long will Harvard University continue to condone slavery? And number two, how long before Harvard University finally frees Renty once and for all? And that's why the students, black students all over America, we're planning a march on Harvard University to free Renty. Won't you all join us?
Can we just go back and summarize very simply, why do you sue Harvard? What are they responsible for?
Yes, ma'am. I'll do it. Okay. Tell me when you're ready.
Yes.
The director Steve McQueen and award-winning actor Brad Pitt told the story of Solomon Northup in the Oscar-winning movie 12 Years a Slave. In the lawsuit that I have filed with Josh Koskoff for Tammy Lanier, the great-great-great-granddaughter of the African slave Renty, we seek to tell the story of Renty, who by our calculation is 169 years a slave. And in this lawsuit, this landmark lawsuit, this precedent-making lawsuit, we ask two questions primarily. Number one, how long will Harvard University continue to condone slavery? Number two, how long before Harvard University finally frees Renty? The students in America are going to be marching in the Great March on Harvard to finally make Harvard free Renty and relinquish those slave photographs, which are very valuable to his family, and which will mark the first time in history that an American institution has ever been forced to relinquish property and give proper inheritance to the lineal descendants of African slaves and black people.
So how can you prove that Tamara is the descendant of Renty? How can you prove that?
It is miraculous what Tamara Lanier has been able to do. Absolutely a miracle. Because you got to remember, the basic tenets of slavery was to break up the black family, break up black family relations and lineal descendancy, because when the black man and the black woman would procreate, they would then tear them apart and sell them to different plantations, make them change their names so you couldn't trace your history. They would take the babies from the mothers when they could walk and talk and sell them to other plantations. And so they were trying to tell us, you're not a person, you're property. That's why you can't have a family, because property doesn't have a family. But Tamar Lanier, she was able to use probate papers based on all the stories that her family, her grandmother, her mother, her great-grandfather had told her that got passed from generation to generation about Papa Renty, and that Papa Renty was a great man in our community. And despite what people tell us about black people history, we need to let our family know that we come from the greatness of a man named Renty, who was an African slave. And it's so profound when you think about it, because Louis Agassiz, this Harvard professor, this esteemed professor that Harvard had built up and prepared as the leading scientist in America, was nothing but a racist. And what he was out to prove was that black people were inferior to white people. He was an equal opportunity racist. You know, he didn't think Jews or people of Irish descent should be allowed into Harvard University either. But he went out while Abraham Lincoln was talking about the Emancipation Proclamation. He was talking about, no, blacks are inferior to white people. And he was challenging Charles Darwin and the evolution of the species and survival of the fittest. He was saying, no, white men from the Caucasus Mountains in Europe are the master race, and everybody else is subservient to these white men. And so he was looking for ocular proof of his racist theories. So he went down to South Carolina, which history tells us is where most of the slaves were imported into America from Africa. And so he found on the plantation of Benjamin Franklin Taylor the slave who they referred to as the black African. And it's kind of funny because Tammy Lanier asked her mother, she said, well, why did they refer to him as the black African? Aren't we all from Africa? And they didn't have an answer to that until she discovered that Harvard University had these daguerreotypes, these very valuable photos which represent some of the earliest known photographs of American slaves, and probably some of the oldest photographs ever taken in the world that have been in pristine condition. And so he went there and he found Renty and he found Delia, because you have to remember in 1807, America had outlawed the slave trade. And so because the white slave masters were raping and sexually assaulting black women at such a phenomenal rate, there were very few pure Africans. So this professor, this Harvard professor Agassiz, was looking for a pure African, somebody who didn't have any commingling of his blood, that he was not, and didn't have any white blood in him, and he found it in Renty and his daughter Delia. He made them strip naked, dehumanized them, and took pictures so he could give ocular proof to his racist theory. And based on these pictures, he said, see, they are more Agarian because look at their buttocks, look at their lips, look at their breasts and everything, to prove that they should be in cotton fields in the plantations. So this was, and now Harvard saying they have a right to keep these pictures, that they're theirs. And we are challenging that in court to say they do not have superior right to the family of Renty, the linear descendants, because just like with the Jews after the Holocaust, they were able to prove their linear descendancy, and they got their art and their jewelry back from the German and the Austrian government. So that's what we're doing in this landmark lawsuit against Harvard University.
I have many questions, so let's talk to you.
Okay. All right. I thought that's all we were talking about.
Yeah, this is what we're talking about.
How you been? Good. How you doing?
Just for how many questions.
Okay.
So let's try to do it.
Okay. Okay, we're going to do rapid sound bite.
What are going to be the next steps?
Well, we're going to have the march, and then Harvard at some point is going to answer the lawsuit.
When do you have a date?
They supposed to answer 30 days after they've been sold.
And
And we're going to ask all the presidential candidates who are running for President of America, do they support the family's demand for Harvard University to relinquish the slave photographs?
And until now, did Harvard answer you? What do they say?
No, they have not answered this. Harvard has only, they've been very dismissive to Miss Tamara Lanier. She has emails and proof that she's tried to reach out to them. She's tried to reason with them. They have no interest in acknowledging that black people have the right to have our inheritance, not to have our images.
Yeah. And which evidences are you gonna show at the lawsuit, like to prove that she's a descendant?
Oh, we're gonna have all the records to prove that she's a descendant. And I encourage everybody to read the lawsuit. In the pleadings, we laid out the history of Harvard and their complicity when it came to slavery and segregation, and how they, in 1850, when people were trying to stop slavery, they were working to expand slavery. That lawsuit, I think, should be required reading for all people, and you should read it with your children, because this notion of white supremacy is suddenly creeping back up into society, and we thought we had already litigated that issue and been done with it. But when you look at stuff that happened in Charlottesville, Virginia, you know we still have to fight on even to this day.
So if you win, do you think that this lawsuit is going to change something for the future?
Yes, this lawsuit would be landmark, much in the way as Thurgood Marshall and Brown versus the Board of Education was landmark. Because now you have a precedent to say that everybody else in America have been able to go back and inherit their birthright. I mean, you look at the Japanese Americans, they were compensated for the atrocities they went through. The Native Americans, they have been given subsidies. It's only black people in America that they have denied any acknowledgement that anything is due to descendants of African slaves. So this lawsuit will speak to that. It will force the conversation.
According to you, why do we talk about reparation only now? Because it seems to be like the main topic in the Democratic campaign. Why is it now?
Well, you know, some people don't want to talk about reparations now. They, I believe, understand that black people literally built this country on our backs. Free labor. I mean, it's involuntary servitude. And so you have to acknowledge that to try to repair the harm. But until you acknowledge it, you never get to the repairing of the harm. So they don't want to go there. And we got to keep fighting them to force the conversation. And when you say why now, I only say this here. There's never a wrong time, America, to do the right thing.
That's right. But do you think there is an element that, you know, like, is that the lawsuit that actually make people talk about reparation now?
I think it's the lawsuit is helping to force the conversation on reparations. Ta-Nehisi Coates did a great job. You know, they've been reparations lawsuits before. Johnny Cochran brought a reparations lawsuit. They summarily dismissed it. Charles Ogletree, these are great lawyers, civil rights. They dismissed Charles Ogletree lawsuit. So we're not bringing a reparations lawsuit. What we're bringing is a lawsuit that is well-grounded on well-established property law principles. This is a property law claim. And so people will read into what it is, but what it will signify is the first time descendants of African slaves have ever been able to recover an inheritance that was rightfully theirs from slavery.
I read in the New York Times that you want to make a tour of America with that picture. Tell me more about it.
Yes, ma'am. I think it would be wholly appropriate for Tamara Lanier and her family, when they finally get these slave images of their ancestors in their possession, when they finally achieve this landmark victory, they should, before it gets put in a museum where poor black boys and girls can never visit, we should take those photographs to America in St. Louis, Detroit, Dallas, Oakland, Los Angeles, Miami, Charlotte, all around America, and have the conversation about the proper respect black people should get to build in this country and to denounce white supremacy, and have our children understand that we have to, from an early age, start discussing that white supremacy is morally reprehensible, and that we got to speak truth to power every chance we get. Even when we have somebody in the White House that tries to say they're good people, you can't be. No, Harvard isn't the only American institution to participate in slavery. It's not the only institution in America to participate in slavery, because in fact, all American institutions participated in slavery. Harvard is the only education institution in America. And miraculously, because of my I was able to do something that slavery was intended for her not to do, and that is to be able to trace her lineal descendancy back to her great-great-great-grandfather, which Harvard has these very valuable photographs worth millions and millions of dollars that she, in her lawsuit, we are fighting for a black family to finally get their inheritance from what was due to them from slavery.
Attorney Crump, a quick question, a very quick question. And Attorney Crump.
Okay, let's go ahead because I'm going to do this with
Thank you. And just very briefly, can you speak to the irony of having an Eric Holder as the top law enforcement person in this country, but now the recent killing of our beloved artist Nipsey Hussle, his assailant is Eric Holder. Now, with the background as a legal professional, what is going to stop our violent black man to black man? Since in this ironic Eric Holder assailant and law enforcement, is it law, is it back to community, and us police can deal with our situations?
If we in court, I would say objection, compound question.
But since we're not,
I would say this. I had the opportunity to meet Nipsey Hussle with Trayvon Martin's foundation event in Los Angeles that they did with Kobe Bryant, and it was profound because he was talking even back then in 2012 and 2013 about the community. We have to reinvest in ourselves. We can't run from our community. We have to build up our schools. It was really profound to hear this young brother using his influence to try to speak directly to the hearts and minds of people in our community. And he still I mean, he was really speaking to her power. And so you reveal that justice for his family is that it's paramount in Los Angeles, but to the Department of Justice, especially since we see the president, he's quick to talk about stuff with Colin Kaepernick or Jesse Smollett, but when it's our people being killed, he's silent. So let's make sure we continue to speak truth to power.
Ashay, thank you. Somebody else take it.
See, he's going to celebrity one.
Can I bring him in?
Yeah. You can bring him in.
Bring your attention to my book. Stop. Yes.
Yeah, call or email.